Florida, Croeso to the extraordinary meeting of the Public Board for Hywel Health Board. We have just 2 items on the agenda this morning. So I'll start with apologies. I've received apologies from Winston Weir, dependent member, from Lee Davis and from Andrew Carruthers. And one of our independent members, Gareth Rainsford, is going to be a little late. So I'm going to move straight into the rest of the agenda. Any declarations of interest on the items on the agenda? No? Okay, thank you. So we'll move into the first item, which is the primary care contractual applications relating to Cross Hands and Tumble. And we've all received the papers and have read them, so I'm going to hand over to Jill Patterson, our Director of Primary Care, to take us through.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, before I begin with the paper, I'd just like to extend my thanks to members of the population and the practice who have engaged with us during this process. I'd also like to thank CLICE and our communications and engagement team as well for supporting the arrangements. Well, we're here to consider today the future provision of general medical services for the Cross Hands and Tumble practice. And on the 29th of September, the Health Board received the termination of the contract from the partners of the practice in terms of providing general medical services. They've provided 6 months' notice in line with the regulations, and therefore the contract will terminate on the 31st of March. And it's essential that the Health Board therefore decides on the appropriate arrangements going forward from the 1st of April. What this process triggers is a vacant practice panel process. So the vacant practice panel met on the 17th of October to examine the options that are available to the Health Board in these circumstances. And there are 4 options that the Health Board is able to consider. Firstly, the procurement of a general medical services contract by another GMS provider. Secondly, the provision of an APMS contract, which is an alternative provider of medical services, again requiring a procurement process. The third option would be to disperse the patient population to other practices, and the fourth option would be taking over that contract by the Health Board as a managed practice. Cross Hands and Tumble serves a population of 7,600 patients. Their main site operates outside of Tumble practice, and they also operate from the Cross Hands Health Centre, where they're co-located by another practice from the area, Pennygroves. You'll see from the papers, Chair, that the practice boundary overlaps with to a larger extent with 3 practices, and to a slightly lesser extent with a further 3 practices. So there are 6 practices that have some common area across that population base. Over the past 2 years, the Health Board has been working very closely with the practice, who have on several occasions advised the Health Board of issues around their own sustainability, related to financial pressures and also to workforce pressures, which have affected their ability to continue with practice going forward. It was hoped that this would be averted, however, with the resignation
Yeah.
Thank you. So as a consequence of the issues of sustainability that the partners were feeling at that point, we received the termination of their contract, as I've advised, on the 29th of September. Now, also in line with regulation, it's normal at that point, prior to the vacant practice panel, that we go out to seek expressions of interest on an informal basis that may help to inform the process that the vacant practice panel undertakes. And although it is informal, we did receive 2 expressions of interest from other practices who advised they would be interested in taking over that practice population. We received a further number of expressions of interest which felt they could take part of that practice population. The vacant practice panel considered all of the options, and in line with the fact that they felt that there were expressions of interest expressed at that point in time, it was felt that it would be reasonable to take to the public the consideration that the Health Board would engage in a full procurement process to find an alternative provider of general medical services or an alternative provider of general medical services. In terms of then thinking about the options of dispersal, as I say, it was felt that it would again be reasonable to consider that option in view of the fact that some practices had expressed that they would consider taking over part of the practice patient population. In considering the issue of a managed practice, however, there was concern to the vacant practice panel that there were already 2 managed practices within that geographical area. Both of those practices rely heavily on locums. Sustainability of robust medical cover can always be a challenge. To add a further managed practice into that geographical area again provide further strain on the vision of locums for that geographical population. In addition, there was perceived to be a financial risk to the Health Board as a consequence of taking over a further managed practice due to the costs of locum cover at that point, and also constraints in terms of the provision of the primary care team to support that process. It was felt, therefore, that 2 options would be taken as the preferred options to engage with the public. An engagement plan was developed and a public process was established in collaboration with LICE. There have been several opportunities, however, for the public to engage with the Health Board. In writing, by returning paper questionnaires to the Health Board, online, through scanning a QR code, by telephone to the Communications Hub, by email to the Communications Hub, and also by attending 2 drop-in events, which were held in Tumble Hall, and then the second event on the 21st of November in the Cross Hands Club and Institute. Feedback was also provided directly to clients who attended both drop-in events to observe the engagement with the public, to talk to patients themselves, and to come to their own recommendations in terms of the process. We also took time to discuss with the patients what was important to them as part of that process. And what we continued to hear were issues around good access, continuity of care, and a safe practice team. Over 500 responses were received, and of those responses, 426 people, 85% of the population, said that they would like to see the provision of general medical services continuing to be provided from the Tumble and Cross Hands practice from a new service provider, whilst 46 people felt that they would not object to being dispersed to another practice, and 7 individuals felt that they would like to be part of the Health Board managed practice. We've also received stakeholder feedback, which is included in the papers that the board members have received. Stakeholder feedback was provided from the Anne Gwendrath Cluster Lead, community councillors for Llannon Board, Dame Nearifus MP, and practice submissions for Penrose and Lyme surgery. And feedback from LICE on the engagement process is attached separately as Appendix 5. So, Chair, I just wanted to commend the robust process that we have been through to come to the preferred options that we would wish to consider today. And I would like the board to note the process that has been undertaken to date. I'd like the board to note recommendations from the vacant practice panel regarding the 2 options, the 2 preferred options, to consider the outcome of the public and stakeholder engagement, including the response from LICE, and agree that a response to the public and stakeholder engagement to undertake a formal procurement exercise should be undertaken to secure a new general medical services contract to deliver care for the current registered population of Cross Hands and Tumble. and also agree that if the procurement process does not identify a suitable single GMS provider for the onward provision of general medical services, that the board gives full consideration to the other options which remain, which would include a managed dispersal or a health board managed practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill, and also Brian, apologies for not welcoming you to the board for today's discussions. So I'm going to open it out for any questions. Got any questions? Okay, I've got a couple. Oh, sorry, Dan.
Sorry, I apologise, I was behind, likely to go in interest. A close family relative is actually patient of the practice.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I've got a couple of points. On page 3 of the main paper, there's reference there to financial implications for operating a managed practice. Do we have a baseline for those costs? Now, I know this is something we've discussed before, so have we got a baseline for costing of a managed practice?
We understand more now that we have SIX, and so we do have more robust budget plans in place. However, the concern is still with the local costs that we're attributing with. So we are running over our budget prediction for the managed practices presently, and I think the indication was that taking a 7th managed practice could add a further cost pressure of £500,000 onto the primary care budget.
Okay, and just to pursue that a bit, does that mean that we've not identified the correct budget, or is that because it's costing more than us contracting with the GMS provider?
We believe it's costing more at the moment because of the rates that we have around locums. We have a cap that's in place, and we haven't taken a piece of work to look at reviewing that further in an attempt to reduce those costs so that they become more economically viable.
Jill?
Yes, thank you. We do understand the baseline operating budget for practice, but it's very different to be able to express that in exactly the same way as an independent contractor budget. I would want to just balance the conversation as well to say that we also believe there are certain efficiencies about having a managed practice whereby we can control certain things, but also we can work very closely with individuals around things such as referrals and other things which may be costly in other ways in terms of affecting the value and sustainability of the service. So there is a balance, but we know that it is well known across the whole of Wales actually that the main factor of locum costs is a significant financial challenge for us.
Okay, thank you. Chad?
There's a question in the chat from Chantal for Jill. If it's all right.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So Chantal's asking, have we done an impact assessment as to how it would impact on those who may not be able to access GP services?
We haven't done an impact assessment in line with this, but I think there is a considerable piece of work that's not just related to this item actually, to be honest. It relates to all members of practice populations in terms of the availability of services to members of the practice. So that's something we ask all contractors to consider, and we have to consider it in our own managed practices as well to make sure that we have a range of mechanisms in place to provide the opportunity for individuals, and that might be remote access, as we know that became more usual through COVID, but also there are still home visits in where they're appropriate, as well as opportunities for seeing individuals at practice in a different way to allow their needs to be met, where they may have hearing difficulties, for example. So it depends on the issues around access which we're talking about. But we would expect those issues to be considered.
Okay, thank you. I will bring in Phil, but I wondered where we are with using the quality impact assessment around these decisions. Can you not do that?
We consider quality in the round, I think, in terms of the issues around what makes a reasonable and good service in terms of quality, the provision for individuals, but we haven't used I have to say, we have not used the impact assessment in its format to consider for this decision.
Okay, that's outside of here, not for this necessary for this case. Phil?
So I had one comment, one question. I mean, I thought I was in the SBI, I was impressed by the 426 people, or 85% of the respondents who said that they wanted to see the provision of GMS services continued to be delivered out of Dunbar Cross Hand. So I thought that was an impressive sort of majority view of the public who responded. My question was,
Yeah.
we're off.
We'll just wait and see if it can be. Gosh, isn't she on our around here? Is that? Okay, right. Apologies for the dropping in and out with the Wi-Fi. Phil, do you want to continue?
So my question was, given our plans for infrastructure development in the area, which would have affected this practice anyway, does our decision on this impact on those plans in any way? Should we be influenced by that?
And certainly as part of the new development that's expected around the Cross Hands area, we would be wanting to recommend as part of that procurement process that that option is available. We would be commending that, so would expect that to continue. And similarly, if the decision was for a health board managed practice, again, that would be part of our expectations that the new facility will be part of our future plans.
Okay. John, I was going to say, John, come at the end because you want to go.
Okay.
John, you.
No, thank you, Chair. Picking up really on those kind of potential opportunities with development of infrastructure, whilst the paper is very clear and articulates the 7,600 patients the practice currently has, many of us will know that within the kind of Cross Hands area, there's been a huge increase in the number of new homes which have been built. Now, whilst that's seen some dispersal of the existing population in the Arun and Gwynedd valleys, it's also seen a huge migration of people coming into the area as well. So I was just wondering, in terms of, as part of the considerations of the options that we've got presented today, has the significant increase in domicile population within the area also been factored in as a further kind of demand upon the services which will need to be required by those people coming into the area?
As part of the work that we've been doing with the neighbouring practices and our discussions around this, some are indicating that they have the capacity to take on more patients. They are looking to grow their practices in the future. So I'm not particularly overly concerned at this point in time that will be an impacting factor on this decision. And we will obviously continue to work with those practices around the sustainability agenda to ensure that they can continue to provide services for the totality of the population.
Thank you. Steve.
Yeah, just a couple of things from me, if I may. Firstly, thank you to the team for all that you've done on this. I know it's a huge amount of work when these things happen. Of course, we would not wish to see contractors getting into the position where they need to hand their contracts back. But the way in which you've been able to do it, I think the number of times you've done it now, you've learned lessons, and it's been a really good but quite challenging process. So thank you for that. Just reflecting on the chair's question around the quality of it, I think I'm right saying we didn't have the quality tool the last time we had to make a decision like this. I'm not sure if it applies, but I think there is certainly some value in maybe looking at the quality impact of the two options broadly that you put forward. I guess they'd be relatively marginal, but I think it might be a good piece of work to do, and maybe start to use that tool more in primary care would be a good thing generally. And I guess the only thing I wanted to mention is whilst it is always a challenge both for us, but particularly for the local population affected when a contract gets handed back, the board is having a discussion later today in seminar about the primary care strategy. And I guess this speaks to the real importance for us to look at how we can not just create a sustainable primary care service and a long-term primary and community service, but also to enable it to flourish. So because it becomes the bedrock of what everything else that we're trying to do. So in some ways, this discussion underlines the importance of that during that regard.
Yeah, Jill.
Yes, it does, thank you. And I think what we'll be indicating later, and we'll be looking at some of the data. I think we continue to be amazed actually about how much activity is undertaken in primary care. Workforce is obviously key to that, and workforce is key to this decision today. We will need a sustainable workforce. and thinking in that future discussion about how we encourage that in a different way, look at different models, will be part of this consideration. And we would hope that this practice, in whatever form, will benefit from that.
Thank you. Thank you. If unfortunately not compromise dispersal, does that take into consideration the staff as well from that practice?
The staff are the responsibility of the independent contractor, and therefore it would be their responsibility to ensure that an appropriate process is undertaken to manage staff. Clearly, where there are this dispersals taking place, I'm thinking about previous experience, there are often opportunities then for individuals in any of the receiving practices as part of that process.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Joe, you want to read out a comment we received from Helen at Plyce?
Yes, there's also a comment from Helen in Plyce noting that the population were also really interested in new development as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if there are no more questions, if I can take the board to the recommendations on page 5 of the paper, and I will go through these. First of all, we're asked to note the recommendations of the vacant practice panel. Content to do that. To consider the outcome of the public and stakeholder engagement, including a response from Plyce. With that. So the next one is to agree that in response to the public and stakeholder engagement, a formal procurement exercise should be undertaken to secure a new GMS service provider to deliver care to the registered population for Tumble across Hants. Do we agree with that recommendation? Yes, thank you. And to further agree that if this doesn't identify a single suitable provider for the onward provision of general medical services, the board will give full consideration to the other options available, which will include managed list dispersal or health board managed practice. In terms of that recommendation? Okay, thank you.
And just assume,
Sorry.
just on that recommendation, that would mean that another paper would come
Yes.
to the board for
Yes.
us to consider that rather than those just go ahead.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the intention of that recommendation. The board would need to reconsider after the outcome of the.
If I can raise a point, I think if I may just clarify, the reason we put in a second alternative option, which was the third one from the vacant practice panel, but clearly gave the board the opportunity to consider its decision between the two, was because of the shortness of the timescale. In terms of a procurement process is going to really run us to the wire, to be honest, in terms of knowing whether or not we've got an option available. What we didn't want to do, and I just will need to take board members through this if I may, there could be a danger that we have to opt into, even if the managed practice option isn't the preferred option, and we may have an alternative, to end up going into a managed practice for a matter of weeks and then out again. And I think board members need to be aware of the challenges of two paying staff in and out of a process, and the level of uncertainty that it also gives to members of the public. And therefore, I think if it were possible, and it may not be, we had hoped that the board would consider what the second preferred option might be today, to allow us as far as possible to work through that without finding the time to have to come back to another board. But it may be, Chair, that you would prefer to just come back to another board.
Sorry, I've misunderstood that recommendation. I don't.
It only takes a week to call an extraordinary board,
I think
so we can.
Yeah, I feel more comfortable. We haven't had that debate in full here, so bearing in mind the feedback. And I think it seems to be some positivity around the procurement process, so we'll wait, but we can call it very, very short notice if needed.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So on that basis, we'll finish that item, but I would like to thank Jill, you, Rhian and all the team who've involved in this process, and also Plyce for their part in it. I know myself how much work goes into these, and it's always, we have really good responses from the public. This is very important to primary care, and it's good. Today we'll be having more discussions about that a little bit later, so thank you. Right, so we'll move on to the second item, which is the approval for the RARC works. And I think Hugh, you taking that item?
Diolch Cadeirydd. Just introduce the item very briefly. This clearly relates to the ongoing remediation work in Withybush. The board will be aware of the allocation of capital from Welsh Government. We received £12.8 million worth of capital for the remediation works that are going on there. And this paper seeks approval for the award of a contract to Lewis Construction. It's coming to board because it's over £1 million in value and £1,170,000 is within the budget, and it deals with areas around outpatients area, the kitchen and the temporary kitchen arrangement. It's awarded in line with the framework that we've got in place with alongside Swansea Bay, which is the shared services framework for West Wales, and in line with UK EU requirements.
Okay, thank you very much. We're all probably very familiar with ROC than we ever hoped to be. Maynard.
You talked about awarding the contract. Do you know what type of contract it is? In the past, rather than a fixed cost contract, we've had to go into it. What was effectively a time and materials contract? So is there any risk to this growing or better shrinking?
I understand the risk is capped, but I'll double check that to make sure we get back to you.
Thanks.
I think it's under a capped arrangement.
Just one question, and it might be just my misunderstanding. What is a call-off agreement?
So it's a maximum value contract, so we could call off up to that level. So it gives us some security, hence the capping arrangement.
Just with that wording, yeah, that's fair. Just in the recommendation, I saw it there. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? No? Okay, so I'll take the recommendation. First one, to approve the contract with the call-off agreement, as has been explained. People content to do that, to approve that?
Chair, just for completeness, this has already been to Welsh Government, hasn't it? 'Cause it's over £1 million after the board, they've already started.
Yes, it's
I'm happy to note the second part of the recommendation.
That's just recognising there will be further contracts in the ECAP.
Okay, great, thank you very much. So, we're going to carry on. It's that Karen. Okay.
Yeah, the problem is it's in the way than everything else.
Yeah, apologies to everyone watching this that we're having a few issues with Wi-Fi connection. But this is the end of the meeting. The date and time of the next meeting is the 25th of January, and we are in Ceredigion, in Abereron, the local authority headquarters, and that is thanks to the good offices of our interim vice chair that we are able to go. So thank you, everybody. So that concludes the extraordinary board meeting. Thank you.